The building stood tall against the purple sky. It was made of crystal that caught the light in strange ways. This was the Galactic Cognitive Institute, the most important place for testing intelligence in the entire galaxy. For 300 years, the smartest beings from every corner of space came here to prove themselves. Minho Park stood outside the entrance, looking up at the massive structure. He was 28 years old from Seoul on Earth. He wore simple clothes and carried only a small bag. Nothing about him looked special. He was average height, average build, with dark hair and glasses that he pushed up his nose when he was nervous. Right now, he was very nervous. Behind him, Ambassador Hana Kim placed a hand on his shoulder. She was the representative of Earth to the Galactic Council. She had fought hard to get humanity this chance. "Remember," she said quietly, "you don't need to be like them. Just be yourself." Minho nodded. He knew what she meant. Humanity had only joined the galactic community 5 years ago. Most alien species still saw humans as primitives. They had good reasons to think this way. Humans couldn't do the things other species could do. The Virexians, for example, had 4 sections in their brains instead of 2. They could solve complex math problems in seconds. The Tholians were a hive mind species, 12 bodies that shared one consciousness. They could look at a pattern and understand it instantly because 12 pairs of eyes saw it at once. The Zoloths breathed methane instead of oxygen, and they experienced time differently. They could see cause and effect in ways that confused everyone else. And then there were humans. No special brain powers, no hive mind, no strange time perception. They still used computers that needed to be told exactly what to do. While other species had quantum consciousness and could download information directly into their minds, humans had to read books and study for years to learn anything. The Institute had announced a special competition 3 months ago. They called it the Grand Trial. It would be the hardest test of mental ability ever created. Species from all over the galaxy had sent their best candidates. Earth had sent Minho. Many people on Earth thought it was a mistake. Why send an ordinary person to compete against beings with superior mental abilities? But Minho's teacher, Dr. Somin Lee, had recommended him. She worked at the Cognitive Science Institute in Seoul and had spent years studying how humans remember things. She believed Minho had something special, even if it didn't look impressive on paper. As Minho entered the building, he saw the other contestants for the first time. They were gathered in a large waiting hall. Some looked like giant insects. Others were clouds of gas held together by energy fields. There were beings made of crystal, beings that floated without legs, and beings that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. One contestant stood out from the rest. She was Virexian, about 7 feet tall with 4 eyes arranged around her head so she could see in all directions at once. Her skin was silver and seemed to shimmer with its own light. This was Vexithora, the champion who had won the trials 4 times in a row. She was famous across the galaxy. When Vexithora's 4 eyes landed on Minho, she made a sound that the translation device rendered as laughter. It was not a kind sound. "A human," she said, her voice carrying across the hall. "How amusing. Tell me, primitive, can you even perceive the full spectrum of light? Or do you stumble through existence seeing only a fraction of reality?" Several other contestants made their own versions of laughter. Minho felt his face grow hot, but he said nothing. He had expected this. A hologram appeared in the center of the hall. It was Coordinator Thelnos, the head of the Institute. His form was humanoid but clearly artificial, made of light and data rather than flesh. "Welcome, contestants," the coordinator said. His voice somehow spoke in every language at once, translated instantly by technology humans barely understood. "You have been chosen to attempt the grand trial. Only one of you will succeed. Many of you will not even complete the first stage." The hologram waved its hand and the walls of the hall became transparent. Beyond them, Minho could see an enormous spherical room. It was at least 300 meters across, big enough to hold a small building. The walls glowed with screens and displays. "This is the trial chamber," Thelnos continued. "Tomorrow you will enter this space and face the infinite mosaic. It is a puzzle created by the first civilization, the ancient race that existed before any of our current species. The mosaic contains 10,000 pieces. Each piece is a 4-dimensional object with properties that change based on perspective and observation. 4-dimensional. Minho's heart sank a little. Humans could barely imagine 4 dimensions, let alone work with objects that existed in that space. "You will have 72 hours to complete the mosaic," Thelnos said. "No breaks, no sleep, no external computing assistance. You may use only your natural cognitive abilities. The puzzle pieces can be seen across the full electromagnetic spectrum and beyond. They contain patterns in light, gravity, magnetism, and quantum probability. Minho looked around at the other contestants. They seemed confident, even excited. He was the only one who looked worried. That evening, Minho sat alone in his assigned quarters. The room was designed for humans, which meant it had things like a bed and a chair, unlike some of the other rooms he had glimpsed. He took out a notebook from his bag. It was old-fashioned, made of actual paper. He also had several pencils. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Dr. Somin Lee back on Earth. Despite the vast distance, quantum communication made it instant. "Remember what I taught you," her message said. "Don't try to compete with their abilities. Use yours. You see stories where they see data. That's not a weakness." Minho smiled slightly. Dr. Lee had spent 3 years training him in advanced memory techniques. She had taught him about chunking, about memory palaces, about narrative construction. These were old human methods, some dating back thousands of years. While other species had developed technology to enhance their minds, humans had developed techniques to make the most of the minds they had. He wondered if it would be enough. 10,000 pieces, 4-dimensional objects, patterns and spectrums he couldn't even see. How could paper and pencil compete with quantum processors and 4-lobed brains? But he had come this far. Earth was counting on him whether he wanted that pressure or not. Tomorrow he would enter that chamber and do his best. That was all anyone could ask. He looked at his blank notebook one more time, then went to sleep. He would need all his strength for what was coming. The morning came too quickly. Minho woke to an alarm that played soft tones instead of harsh beeps. For a moment he forgot where he was. Then reality crashed back. Today was the grand trial. He got dressed slowly, checking his bag 3 times to make sure he had his notebook and pencils. Other contestants might bring advanced scanning devices or neural enhancement tools. He had paper. It seemed ridiculous, but it was all he had. In the preparation hall, 53 contestants gathered. 53 beings from 32 different species, each one representing the peak of their civilization's cognitive ability. Minho recognized some from his research. There was a Quellian, a species with natural telekinetic powers who could move objects with their minds. A group of Tholians stood together, their 12 bodies moving in perfect sync as one shared mind. Several Virexians, including Vexithora, stood apart from the others with an air of confidence that came from multiple victories. Ambassador Hana Kim found Minho in the crowd. She gave him a small nod. She couldn't help him now. The rules were clear. Once the trial began, contestants were completely alone. Coordinator Thelnos appeared as a hologram in the center of the hall. "Contestants, please follow me to the trial chamber." They moved through a long corridor that curved and twisted in ways that hurt to look at. The institute existed partially outside normal space, Minho had read. The architecture reflected this. Finally, they entered the spherical chamber he had seen yesterday. It was even more impressive from inside. The walls seemed infinitely far away despite the chamber being only 300 meters across. Gravity worked normally at the bottom where they stood, but Minho could see other contestants already floating up to different levels, positioning themselves for better views of the puzzle space. "The infinite mosaic will now be revealed," Thelnos announced. The air in the center of the chamber shimmered, then all at once 10,000 objects appeared. They floated in a vast cloud, each one suspended in its own small field of energy. Minho stared at them, trying to understand what he was seeing. The puzzle pieces were like nothing from Earth. They weren't flat like jigsaw puzzle pieces. They had depth and angles that seemed wrong. As Minho looked at one piece, it appeared to be a blue triangle. But when he shifted his gaze slightly, it became a red circle, then a green square. The shape itself was changing based on how he looked at it. 4-dimensional objects viewed in 3-dimensional space, he realized. Like how a 3-dimensional sphere would look like a changing circle to someone who could only see in 2 dimensions. Except his brain wasn't built to process this. It hurt to look at them for too long. Around him, other contestants immediately began working. The Tholians moved with eerie coordination, their 12 bodies spreading out to examine pieces from multiple angles simultaneously. Vexthora stood perfectly still, but Minho could see her 4 eyes moving rapidly. She was processing information at incredible speed. The Quellian contestant reached out with invisible mental force, pulling pieces closer for examination without needing to physically touch them. Minho stood still. He forced himself to breathe slowly. Don't panic, he thought. You knew it would be hard. You prepared for this. He pulled out his notebook and opened it to the first page. Then he took out a pencil. Several nearby contestants glanced at him with what might have been curiosity or contempt. Primitive tools for a primitive species. But Minho ignored them. He had a plan. Dr. Soman Lee had taught him that the human brain wasn't designed to store random information. It was designed to understand stories, to find patterns, to create meaning. While other species might try to catalog these pieces like a computer database, he would do something different. He walked up to the first piece, number 0001. According to the small display that appeared near it, the piece shifted as he approached, cycling through different shapes and colors. To his limited human eyes, it looked like a curved horn, then a wave, then a spiral. The colors flowed from blue to green to purple to shades he didn't have names for. Minho drew a simple sketch in his notebook. Just a curved line with a few notes. Wing, he wrote next to it. Bird's wing in flight. The piece didn't actually look like a wing, but that's what his brain wanted to see in the curves and angles, so that's what he would remember it as he moved to the next piece, number 0002. This one appeared as a sharp angle, like two lines meeting at a point. Mountain peak, he wrote. Snow on top. Piece after piece Minho examined and named. He wasn't trying to memorize exact shapes or measurements. He was building a story. The wing belonged to a bird. The bird flew over mountains. In the valley below there was a river. Piece 0234 became Fork in the River. Piece 0567 became Old Tree by the riverbank. Hours passed. Minho worked steadily, filling page after page with rough sketches and short descriptions. He organized the pieces into chapters of his story. The first chapter was about the bird and the landscape. The second chapter introduced other characters. A sleeping giant in the mountains, a village in the valley, travelers on a road. Around him, other contestants had started assembling parts of the puzzle. Vexathora had already connected nearly 500 pieces into a complex structure that rotated slowly in the air. The Tholians had assembled even more, working with the efficiency of 12 minds acting as one. The Quellian was testing combinations at high speed, using telekinesis to rapidly move pieces together and apart. Minho had assembled nothing. He was still examining individual pieces, one at a time, writing in his notebook. To any observer, he looked like he was falling hopelessly behind. In the observation gallery above, Ambassador Hana Kim watched with growing concern. Other ambassadors had already started making comments. The Virexian ambassador spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. The human appears to be drawing pictures, the ambassador said with amusement. How charming. Perhaps he thinks he can sketch his way to victory. Hana said nothing. She had faith in Minho, but even she was starting to wonder. 20 hours into the trial, and he hadn't assembled a single piece. Other contestants were making visible progress. Some had thousands of pieces already in place. But down in the chamber, Minho was doing something no one else was doing. He was building a complete mental map. Every piece he examined was added to his internal story. He could close his eyes and walk through his imaginary world, visiting each piece in its place within the narrative. The bird with the curved wing lived in Chapter 1, page 3. The fork in the river was Chapter 2, page 12. The sleeping giant's shoulder was Chapter 5, page 8. Each piece had a location in the story, which meant it had a location in his memory. More importantly, the story itself was revealing something. As he examined more pieces, he started to see how they might connect. Not through mathematical relationships or quantum signatures, but through narrative flow. The bird's wing needed to connect to something that suggested motion. The mountain peak needed to connect to something that implied height. The river needed to flow somewhere. At hour 23, Minho finally began to assemble pieces. His movements were slow and deliberate. He would stand motionless for several minutes, eyes closed, walking through his memory palace. Then he would open his eyes, walk directly to a specific piece among the thousands, and place it exactly where it needed to go. He made no mistakes. Every piece he placed was correct on the first try. He never had to backtrack or rearrange. While other contestants were working through trial and error, testing combinations and sometimes getting them wrong, Minho worked with complete certainty, because he wasn't guessing. He was remembering. The story in his head was telling him where each piece belonged. By hour 30, people in the observation gallery had stopped laughing at the human. They were starting to pay attention. Something unexpected was happening. At hour 40, something remarkable began to happen. Minho's speed increased dramatically. What had started as slow and careful placement became fluid and fast. He moved through the chamber like someone who knew exactly where they were going, because they had been there before. His hands reached out without hesitation. Among 10,000 floating pieces, he would find the exact one he needed within seconds. No scanning, no searching, no trial and error, just pure certainty. Pick up the piece, place it, move to the next one. The other contestants began to slow down. This was natural. As a puzzle grew larger, finding the right pieces among the remaining ones became exponentially harder. It was like trying to find a specific grain of sand on a beach. The more pieces that were already placed, the harder it became to find the ones still needed. But Minho sped up. While others were struggling to search through thousands of remaining pieces, he simply walked to the right one every time. His notebook lay open on the ground nearby, pages covered in sketches and words. But he barely looked at it anymore. He didn't need to. The story was in his head now, complete and clear. Vexithora noticed. She had been so focused on her own work that she hadn't paid attention to the human after that first mocking comment. Now she looked up from her assembly and watched Minho work. Her 4 eyes narrowed in concentration. She had assembled nearly 3,000 pieces. The Tholian collective had managed about 2,500, despite having 12 bodies working together. The Quellian had 2,000. These were impressive numbers. In previous trials, reaching 3,000 pieces had been enough to win. The human had only 800 pieces in place. But his pace was now 3 times faster than anyone else's. Vexithora did the math in her superior Virexian brain. If he maintained this speed, he would catch up, and then surpass them. Impossible, she muttered, but she kept watching. In the observation gallery, the atmosphere had completely changed. Ambassadors who had left to attend other business were being called back. Scientists and cognitive researchers from across the galaxy were gathering to witness something unprecedented. How is he doing it? Someone asked. He spent 20 hours examining pieces without assembling anything, another voice answered. He must have been memorizing them. Memorizing 10,000 four-dimensional objects? That's impossible. Even our best memory enhancement technology can't do that. Apparently, human brains can. Ambassador Hana Kim felt a surge of pride mixed with amazement. She had believed in Minho, but even she hadn't fully understood what Dr. Somin Lee's training had accomplished. She watched as Minho continued his steady work, piece after piece after piece. Hour 50 arrived. Minho had caught up to the Quellian. The telekinetic being stared at him in disbelief. All 3 of their eye stalks focused on the human who moved with impossible confidence. Hour 55. Minho passed the Tholian collective. All 12 of their bodies stopped working simultaneously, their shared consciousness momentarily stunned by what they were witnessing. A single human mind, organic and unenhanced, was outperforming their combined mental power. Hour 60. Minho reached Vexithora's count of 3,000 pieces and kept going. The Virexian champion had stopped assembling pieces altogether. She stood motionless, all 4 eyes tracking the human's movements. Her mathematical brain was trying to understand how this was possible, and finding no answer. Minho was unaware of the attention he was receiving. He was completely absorbed in his work. In his mind, he was walking through his story, visiting each location, each character, each scene. The bird's wing connected to the clouds connected to the wind connected to the waves on the ocean. Each connection made sense in the narrative he had constructed. And more than that, he was starting to see the bigger picture. The individual pieces told small stories, but together, they were revealing something larger. The infinite mosaic wasn't just a random puzzle. It was a message, a history, a record of ancient civilizations and how they had lived and thought. The first civilization, whoever they had been, had encoded their knowledge into this puzzle. And they had done it in a way that required not just intelligence but understanding, not just processing power but wisdom. Anyone could catalog 10,000 pieces. But to truly solve the mosaic, you had to comprehend what it was trying to say. Minho understood this because he had spent 20 hours not just looking at pieces, but listening to them. His narrative approach had forced him to find meaning in every shape, every color, every angle. And that meaning was revealing the structure of the whole. Hour 68. Minho placed the final piece. The 10,000th piece clicked into place with a soft sound that seemed to resonate through the entire chamber. The infinite mosaic was complete. The massive structure hung in the air, a four-dimensional masterpiece that hurt to look at but was breathtakingly beautiful. It showed galaxies being born, civilizations rising and falling, knowledge being passed from one species to another across millions of years. It was the story of intelligence itself, told through shapes and colors and dimensions beyond normal comprehension. The observation gallery erupted in sound. Different species expressed amazement in different ways. Clicking, chirping, electromagnetic pulses, vibrations, and for the humans present, actual applause. Even species who had been skeptical of humanity's inclusion in the galactic community were impressed. Coordinator Thelnos materialized beside Minho, his holographic face arranged in what might have been a smile. "Congratulations, Contestant Park. You have achieved what we deemed nearly impossible. In 68 hours you have completed the infinite mosaic. This is the fastest completion time in the history of the Grand Trial. The mosaic is perfect. You have won." Minho stood looking at the completed puzzle. His legs were shaking from exhaustion. He hadn't eaten or slept in almost 3 days. His hands were cramped from holding pieces. His eyes burned from staring at four-dimensional objects for so long, but his mind was clear. Crystal clear, and in that clarity, he saw something that made his heart sink. "No," he said quietly. The coordinator's holographic face flickered with confusion. "I'm sorry, Contestant Park, but our sensors confirm that all pieces have been correctly placed. The mosaic is complete. You have achieved perfect accuracy." Minho shook his head. "It's not complete. The story is wrong. There are pieces missing." A hush fell over the chamber. Every contestant, every observer, everyone in the entire institute seemed to hold their breath. What was the human saying? Had the exhaustion driven him to confusion? "The infinite mosaic has exactly 10,000 pieces," Thelnos said carefully. "We have counted and verified this many times over the centuries. All 10,000 pieces are present and accounted for." "No," Minho said again. He walked closer to the massive structure, pointing to specific locations. His voice was steady despite his exhaustion. "There should be 10,003 pieces. 3 pieces are missing." "That is impossible," Vexthora said, speaking for the first time in hours. "I have examined this mosaic before. It has always had 10,000 pieces." "You are mistaken, human." "I'm not mistaken," Minho replied. "I remember every single piece I looked at. I remember their shapes, their colors, their relationships to each other. And I remember the gaps. There are 3 places where pieces should exist but don't. 3 holes in the story." He pointed to the first location. "Here, in the 3rd spiral arm of the origin galaxy. There should be a piece here. It would show a supernova remnant. The shape would be irregular, like a flower with torn petals. The color would be in the ultraviolet spectrum, which is why I can't see it properly. But I know it should be there because the narrative requires it. This section tells the story of stellar death and rebirth. Without this piece, the cycle is incomplete." He moved to another section. "Here, in the cultural exchange sequence. This shows different civilizations meeting for the first time. But there's a gap. A missing piece that would connect these 2 timeline branches. It would have interlocking borders and show the moment of first contact. Without it, we don't know how these species learned to communicate." Finally, he pointed to a 3rd location. "And here, in the philosophical framework section. This is where the first civilization encoded their final message. But it's incomplete. The concluding statement is missing. There should be one more piece here that completes their thought." The chamber was absolutely silent. Nobody knew what to say. Vexthora approached Minho slowly. Her 4 eyes studied him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its mocking tone. "Explain," she said simply. "How do you know pieces are missing? We have counted this puzzle hundreds of times. Every competitor who has attempted it verified the inventory before beginning. 10,000 pieces. Always 10,000. Minho bent down and picked up his notebook. The pages were worn now, covered in sketches and notes. He held it up. "Because I remember," he said. "Not just the pieces that exist. I remember what should exist. When I built my mental map of this puzzle, I wasn't just memorizing shapes and colors. I was understanding the story they tell. And every story has a structure, a beginning, middle, and end. Cause and effect. Setup and payoff. He pointed to the first gap again. This section is about stellar evolution. It shows stars being born from gas clouds. It shows them living for billions of years. It shows them dying. But between the living and what comes after, there's nothing. The piece I described, the supernova remnant, that's the missing middle. Without it, the sequence doesn't make sense. The Tholian collective moved closer, their 12 bodies surrounding Minho in a circle. They spoke with one voice from 12 mouths. We share memories across our consciousness. We can recall with perfect accuracy, but we cannot remember something that was never there. How can you remember a piece you never saw? I'm not remembering the piece itself, Minho explained. I'm remembering the space where it should be. The gap in the narrative. Think of it like reading a book where pages have been torn out. You might not know exactly what was written on those pages, but you know something is missing because the story doesn't flow right. The sentences before and after don't connect properly. He moved to the second gap. This one is even more obvious. Look at these two civilizations. They're completely different. One evolved in water, one in volcanic environments. They shouldn't even be able to communicate. But then suddenly, 3 pieces later, they're working together on joint projects. What happened in between? How did they bridge that gap? There's a missing piece here that shows first contact, the moment they learned to understand each other. Coordinator Thelnos flickered uncertainly. This is unprecedented. We must verify your claims. Give me time to check the archives. The hologram vanished. The chamber remained silent. Contestants who had been working on their own puzzles had stopped entirely. Everyone was watching Minho now, some with curiosity, some with skepticism, but no one was mocking him anymore. Ambassador Hana Kim made her way down from the observation gallery. She wasn't supposed to interfere with the trial, but technically the trial was over. Minho had completed the puzzle. What happened now was something else entirely. She found Minho sitting on the ground, leaning against a wall. He looked exhausted. His eyes were closed, but she could tell he wasn't sleeping. Are you certain? She asked quietly. 3 missing pieces? Minho, if you're wrong about this. I'm not wrong, he said without opening his eyes. I know I sound crazy. A human who can barely see half the electromagnetic spectrum, claiming to know more about an ancient alien puzzle than species with superior senses and processing power. But Ambassador, I spent 20 hours studying every single piece, not scanning them, not analyzing them, understanding them. He opened his eyes and looked at her. Dr. Lee taught me that human memory isn't about storing data. It's about making connections, creating meaning. When we remember something, we don't just recall it. We understand it in context. That's what I did here. And the context is wrong. The story has 3 missing chapters. Vexithora had been standing nearby, listening. Now she spoke. I have competed in these trials 4 times. I have studied the infinite mosaic more than any living being. I have never noticed any gaps. That's because you were looking at pieces, Minho said, not at the spaces between them. You were seeing what's there, not what's missing. It's like looking at a constellation and seeing stars, but not noticing that one star is gone. You'd only notice if you knew what the constellation was supposed to look like. And you know what it's supposed to look like? Vexithora asked. After examining it once? Yes, Minho said simply. Because I didn't just examine it. I lived in it. For 20 hours, the infinite mosaic was my entire world. Every piece became part of a story I was telling myself. And when you tell yourself a story over and over, you know it. Really know it. Well enough to recognize when something is wrong. The Quellian contestant drifted over, their body floating a few inches off the ground. They communicated through a translation device that rendered their thoughts as speech. I have telekinetic abilities. I can perceive objects without touching them. I sense no gaps. You sensed what exists, Minho replied. I'm talking about what doesn't exist. Absence, emptiness, the shape of nothing. How do you sense that? Hours passed. Minho was given food and water. Other contestants dispersed, some returning to their own incomplete puzzles, others leaving the chamber entirely. But many stayed, waiting to see if the humans' impossible claim would be proven right or wrong. Finally, Coordinator Thelnos returned. His holographic form materialized in the center of the chamber. For a long moment, he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. Quieter, almost awed. "The Institute has completed its investigation," he announced. "We traced the history of the infinite mosaic back through 400 years of records. The puzzle was discovered in a first civilization vault on the planet Terminus 7. It was excavated, transported here, and cataloged." He paused. The silence stretched. During the initial cataloging, there was an error. 3 pieces were separated from the main collection. They were mislabeled as fragments from a different artifact. They have been stored in a separate facility on the other side of the galaxy for the past 4 centuries. The chamber erupted in noise. Ambassadors in the observation gallery were shouting questions. Contestants were expressing shock in their various languages and methods. Above it all, Coordinator Thelnos raised his holographic hand. "The 3 pieces have been retrieved and scanned," he continued. "They match contestant Park's descriptions with remarkable accuracy. The first piece depicts a supernova remnant. The second shows a first contact event between aquatic and volcanic species. The third completes the philosophical message that the first civilization intended to leave." Thelnos turned to face Minho directly. "Contestant Park, you identified 3 missing pieces that no one knew were missing. You described them accurately despite never having seen them. You recognized gaps in a story that existed only in your mind. This is beyond unprecedented. This is miraculous." Minho stood up slowly. His legs were still shaking. He felt like he might collapse at any moment, but he managed to stay upright. "It's not miraculous," he said. "It's just memory. Human memory. We evolved to remember stories because stories kept us alive. Stories about where the good hunting was. Stories about which plants were poisonous. Stories about how to get home when we were lost. Our brains became incredibly good at holding complete narratives in our heads. And when a narrative is incomplete, we know it. We feel it." He looked around at all the different species watching him. "You all have abilities I don't have. You can process faster, see more, think in ways my brain can't imagine. But this one thing, understanding through story, remembering through narrative, this is what humans do best. It's not better or worse than your abilities. It's just different." Vexathora stepped forward. She extended one of her 4 hands in the human gesture of respect. "I underestimated your species," she said. "I will not make that error again." Minho shook her hand. Then his legs gave out and he sat down hard on the ground. "Sorry," he mumbled. "I think I need to sleep for about 3 days now." As medical personnel rushed to help him, Ambassador Hana Kim smiled. Humanity had proven itself today, not by being stronger or smarter than other species, but by being uniquely human. 3 days later, Minho woke up in a medical facility. His body ached in ways he didn't know were possible. The doctors, both human and alien, told him he had pushed himself to the absolute limit. Another few hours without rest and his body might have shut down completely, but he was alive. And according to the news feeds that Ambassador Hana showed him, he was also famous across the entire galaxy. "They're calling you the Memory Master," Hana said with a smile. "Videos of your trial completion have been viewed billions of times. Scientists from every major species want to study how you did it. Universities are offering you teaching positions. The Institute wants to create an entire new department based on your methods." Minho pushed himself up in bed. "What about the 3 pieces? Did they really match my descriptions?" "See for yourself." Hana activated a holographic display. 3 images appeared, floating in the air above his bed. The first piece showed a supernova remnant, exactly as Minho had described. The shape was irregular, like flower petals torn by wind. The colors were in spectrums he couldn't fully see, but the visible portions matched what he had imagined. The second piece depicted 2 civilizations meeting. One species lived in water. Their bodies adapted to high pressure and darkness. The other species came from volcanic regions, thriving in extreme heat. The piece showed the moment they first communicated, bridging an impossible gap between two completely different forms of life. The third piece completed the philosophical message. When translated, it read, "True wisdom lies not in processing information but in understanding its absence." Minho stared at those words for a long time. The first civilization had known, somehow across millions of years and countless differences, they had understood this fundamental truth. Intelligence wasn't just about what you could know. It was about recognizing what you didn't know, seeing the gaps, understanding the spaces between. "They want you to attend a ceremony," Hana said. "The Institute is going to award you something called the Codex Keeper title. It's only been given out 3 times in the entire history of the Grand Trial. It means you didn't just complete the puzzle, you mastered it. You understood it at a level no one else has." "I don't feel like I mastered anything," Minho said. "I just used the techniques Dr. Lee taught me. Memory palaces, chunking, narrative construction. These are old human methods. Nothing special." "That's exactly what makes it special," a new voice said. Minho turned to see Dr. Soman Lee entering the room. His teacher had traveled all the way from Earth to Nexus Prime. She looked tired from the journey, but her eyes were bright with pride. "What you did, Minho, was show the entire galaxy that advancement doesn't always mean developing new abilities," Dr. Lee said. "Sometimes it means perfecting the ones you already have. Humans have been using memory techniques for thousands of years. We just forgot how powerful they could be because we started relying on computers to remember things for us." She sat down beside his bed. "Other species see our brains as simple because we don't have quantum processors or hive minds. But our brains evolved to do something remarkable, to take random information and weave it into meaningful stories. That's not a weakness. It's a form of intelligence that's just as valid as any other." A few hours later, Minho was discharged from the medical facility. He was still weak but well enough to attend the ceremony. The Institute had transformed the trial chamber into an auditorium. Thousands of beings from hundreds of species had gathered. Minho recognized many of the contestants who had competed alongside him. Vexathora was there in the front row. When she saw Minho, she stood and bowed, a gesture of deep respect in Virexian culture. Around her, other contestants followed suit. The Tholian collective, the Quellian, even species Minho had never spoken to. They were all acknowledging what he had accomplished. Coordinator Thelnos appeared on the central stage. "Today we honor not just a winner, but a teacher. Contestant Park has shown us that cognitive excellence comes in many forms. He used methods we dismissed as primitive and achieved results we thought impossible." The coordinator gestured and the complete infinite mosaic appeared, floating above the stage. All 10,003 pieces now properly assembled. This is the true mosaic, complete at last after 400 years. It took a human, using organic memory and narrative comprehension, to recognize what was missing and describe it accurately from understanding alone. He turned to Minho. "You are hereby granted the title of Codex Keeper. You have not just solved a puzzle. You have revealed a truth about intelligence itself. That wisdom is not about how much you can process, but about how deeply you can understand." The chamber filled with the sounds of celebration, different species expressing joy in different ways. Minho stood there feeling overwhelmed. This wasn't what he had expected when he agreed to come here. He had just wanted to prove that humans belonged in the galactic community. He hadn't meant to revolutionize how everyone thought about intelligence. After the ceremony, Vexathora approached him privately. "I have a question," she said. "When you realized pieces were missing, why did you wait until the puzzle was complete to say anything?" Minho thought about it. "Because I needed proof. If I had said something early, before demonstrating that I could actually complete the puzzle, everyone would have dismissed it. They would have thought my primitive human brain was just confused. By finishing first, by showing that my memory was reliable, I earned the right to be trusted when I said something was wrong." Vexathora's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep thought in her species. "You understood not just the puzzle, but also the psychology of those watching you. That is wisdom." In the weeks that followed, things began to change across the galaxy. The Galactic Cognitive Institute added new courses on narrative cognition and organic memory techniques. Research teams from dozens of species came to Earth to study how humans learned and remembered. Some species even began teaching their children human memory methods alongside their own natural abilities. The 3 recovered pieces were placed in a special exhibit at the Institute, A sign beside them explained their history and how they had been identified. The final line of the sign read, "These pieces remind us that true intelligence includes the wisdom to recognize what is absent." Earth's status in the galactic community shifted overnight. Humanity was no longer seen as the primitive newcomer. They were recognized as bringing a unique and valuable perspective to the greater civilization. Diplomatic doors that had been closed suddenly opened. Trade agreements were offered. Cultural exchanges were proposed. Other species wanted to understand these humans who saw the universe through stories. Ambassador Hana Kim found herself busier than ever, handling requests and opportunities. But she made time to send a message to Earth's government. "We are no longer guests in the galactic community. We are recognized peers." Minho showed them that different doesn't mean inferior. We should all remember that lesson. As for Minho, he returned to Seoul after a month of ceremonies and interviews. He could have stayed on Nexus Prime. The Institute offered him a permanent position. Universities across the galaxy wanted him as a professor, but he chose to go home. He went back to working with Dr. Lee at the Cognitive Science Institute. Together, they trained new students in the old memory techniques. They taught them how to build memory palaces, how to use chunking to organize information, how to construct narratives that made sense of complex data. The galaxy learned something important, Dr. Lee told her students. They learned that our way of thinking, understanding through story, remembering through narrative, is not primitive. It's powerful. Don't try to be like other species with their quantum processors and hive minds. Be human. That's enough. In Minho's small apartment, hanging on the wall above his desk, was a simple piece of paper. It was covered in rough sketches and handwritten notes. To anyone else, it would look like random scribbles. But to Minho, it was a map that had held 10,000 pieces of an impossible puzzle in his memory. More importantly, it was proof. Proof that sometimes the oldest tools are the most powerful. Proof that understanding matters more than processing speed. Proof that humanity had something unique to offer the galaxy. On quiet evenings, Minho would look at that paper and remember. Not just the trial or the ceremony or the fame that followed. He remembered the moment he had realized pieces were missing. The moment he had understood that recognizing absence was just as important as recognizing presence. That was the real lesson of the infinite mosaic. Intelligence wasn't about having the best hardware or the fastest processing. It was about understanding, about seeing not just what is but what should be, about recognizing the spaces between the stars and knowing that those spaces matter just as much as the stars themselves. Humanity had taken its place among the stars, not by becoming like other species, but by being exactly what they were. Storytellers who could see the universe as one vast narrative, and who had the wisdom to recognize when a chapter was missing. And that, Minho thought as he looked at his worn notebook, was something worth remembering.